right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Bold TV. I'm Jon Levine, an incoming media editor at The Wrap, and I'm here with my co-host, John Burnett. He is an author, professor, and co-founder of One Empire Group. Good morning, John.
Good morning, John.
Good to see you.
Likewise.
So thank you all for watching on our on Facebook, and don't forget to like our page and also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. And if you love Bold TV, share the show with your friends.
We want to hear from you all, so make sure you add your questions and comments during the show.
So before we talk about what's in the news this week, we'd like to welcome our first guest onto the show. Thanks for being here, Thomas Landstreet, the founder of N3L Capital Partners, who has said I can call him Tom.
That's correct, you can.
Okay, fantastic. So Tom, can you tell us, first question out of the gate, can you tell us what the Trump administration is proposing with tax reform as we know right now?
Well, he's obviously trying to reduce rates. He's trying to simplify the code. There's 7 different brackets now. He's trying to reduce it to 3. He's lowering the top rate only to 35%, which is the only problem I have with it. Of course, it's a political hot potato when, you're trying to give away to the rich, so-called rich, who, by the way, have only gotten richer under the Obama regime. If you notice the disparity between rich and poor, it's gotten much, much worse, and it often does under Democrats. So the argument falls flat. He's also trying to concentrate the tax cuts on the corporate sector, which of course is necessary to compete with European and other countries where they have an average tax rate of 24%. Ours is 35%. Wow. So that's a very difficult situation for any company. And I'm a small business owner. I really appreciate that, honestly. I'll quit paying. Right now, I use my corporation to pass through the taxes to my personal level. I'll pay it there. I will change that. And I will change my incorporation to take advantage of these tax cuts. And guess what? I'll probably hire somebody. I've been dying to hire this kid. I'm paying him part-time. I want him so bad, and I can't afford him. I will. The first thing I do will probably hire this young man that I've got as an analyst at my firm.
Well, being that you just mentioned young, well, I should say the youth, what's in it for millennials?
Millennials are a fantastic generation because they are so independent. They're also creative. They're also smart, and they're entrepreneurs. In fact, the number of businesses being founded by millennials is far above my peers during my generation. And I've got 3 of them as kids, by the way, and they really are independent thinkers. I would love to capture their imagination and let them know that their creativity and energy should be unfettered. It should be unencumbered. And all government does is disrupt. Right. It regulates, it restricts. And by the way, when you tax something, do you know you get less of it?
It's true.
If it's labor, you get less of it. If it's capital, you get less of it.
But what can you tell millennials, right? Really break it down, simplify it. How does it put money into their pockets?
Yeah.
Well, simply, they don't have to pay the government, which is a net revenue loser.
Right.
If you look at GDP, you know that government spending is about 40% of GDP. I would argue government spending actually detracts from the economy. Any time that you are incentivizing an individual to keep more of what they earn and to make more, you're actually making their life a lot richer on earth.
I'd like to kind of point in for a minute. Is it not true that if we gave these sort of very large tax breaks away, that we would increase the deficit considerably? And didn't that happen under the Bush tax cuts in 2001?
Well, if it does happen, it's only because the guys in Washington, the women in Washington are unwilling to cut spending. We have a very large deficit.
Right.
You could probably cut our government by 1/3 and nobody would even notice.
What would you cut by 1/3 that people wouldn't notice?
Well, entitlements, first off.
People wouldn't notice entitlements? I don't know. I think a lot of people would notice.
Not if they had a job. I don't think people thrive when they're getting things for free from welfare. I don't think that's the proper role of a human being given one life on earth.
Well, you were fortunate to work with the economist Art Laffer, right? And he was noted for saying we can't tax our way to prosperity and we can't spend our way out of debt.
Right.
That's exactly true. The wanton spending in Washington is unbelievable. And I've got the statistics. As an example, after the housing crisis, the '08 crisis, people in Washington, as Art Laffer also said, behave like little girls in a scary movie. They passed trillions and trillions of dollars of spending, one of which an $800 billion shovel-ready, remember the shovel-ready spending project, infrastructure? There's no visible evidence of that infrastructure spending anywhere. Potholes are everywhere.
But is it fair to say you would be against the current tax cuts from the Trump administration as if they don't have corresponding spending cuts or they're not paid for in some way? Is that a correct assessment of your beliefs?
If it meant that we did not get tax cuts, I would not agree with that. I would rather see tax cuts than anything.
Do you believe they'd pay for themselves?
Yes, absolutely.
Well,
What
you
are-
know, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I just don't think there's a lot of evidence. for that.
Your questioning, John, I think is definitely on point. However, I'm reminded of what President JFK stated: for every dollar that's spared from taxation creates a new job and a new salary.
Well, tax rates were a lot higher when JFK was president than they are now. I think there's a diminishing rate of return to that kind of logic.
Right. But when they
We know that when George W. Bush did his tax cuts in 2001, the deficit exploded, and we had a decade of anemic growth, and all of the growth went to 85%, I believe, went to the top 1%.
But George Bush was a very big spender.
He was a big spender.
I mean, you're right.
they didn't pay for themselves.
Dollar for dollar, it may not, but you've got to cut spending. You do
doubled
have
the
to cut
deficit.
entitlements.
Double the deficit. And I'm the millennial sort of on this show right now, and I take honestly great offense to blowing up the deficit by these people in Washington are going to make these decisions that are going to make my life harder long after they're gone, and it's very, very unnerving to me to see all these tax cuts that are going to be instituted they're not going to get paid for.
They need to be paid for by spending cuts. You're right. The government is simply too large. It's involved in too much. An example is if you look at the states, of course, states have a requirement that they actually balance their budget. But did you know that the states with the highest marginal tax rates also have the highest budget deficits?
True.
One for one. If you look at Connecticut, you look at Illinois, they have the highest tax rates and the highest budget deficits. So there's no correlation between high tax rates and a better budget. There is none.
Right.
None.
But California is obviously known on your side for having very high taxes, but their economy is thriving. And meanwhile, Kansas radically lowered taxes over the last decade, and obviously they are not thriving. They've had a number of economic difficulties, as I'm sure you know. So I'm curious. I mean, I don't necessarily believe the idea that it would pay for itself. And I want to talk to sort of other things in the tax
You
code.
bring up something very important about California.
Of course, yeah.
In 2000, when the internet bubble was forming, and there were so many IPOs and so many stock options, and there was so much wealth being created in California, they had a projected budget deficit, actually surplus. Then when the internet bubble burst, and you saw all those tax revenues disappear, they were facing a $13 billion budget deficit within 2 years. The reason is because 25% of the state's general budget revenues came from two different taxes: exercise stock options and realized capital gains. So that's a progressive tax rate where you're skewing your tax revenues at the richest individuals in the country. And then when you have a boom, then a bust, those revenues disappear, and suddenly the state was in huge financial mess. So just a point.
I want to draw your attention to New York Times analysis, just published, I believe, today, saying that, and we can actually put it on the screen if you will, that Donald Trump would personally stand to save $1 billion on his tax returns, as far as we know about his tax returns, if tax reform is passed in its current form. Is that something you think is good?
Hell yes.
You don't think that
kidding?
someone like Donald Trump should
I don't
should-
care. I'm not a big fan of Donald Trump, honestly.
Right.
It doesn't
People
matter.
like him,
Oh, of course they
to save billions of
doesn't
dollars.
bother me one bit. I want more rich people. I want you to be rich.
Does it make more rich people saving Donald Trump that money?
Pardon?
Would saving Donald Trump that $1 billion create more rich people?
Perhaps he may hire another 50 people.
Right.
I don't care about whether he makes money off these tax cuts or not. The truth is what you and I and the rest of us get, and I think it's substantial.
Would it not be better, instead of him saving one person saving $1 billion, if how many dozens of Americans could save money, and if that tax cut went to the bottom quartile, and they could spend that money in the economy?
That's not how it
I think
works.
Donald Trump is probably going to put that money and save it or invest it.
That's not
which
how
is
it
great.
works. The people.
I think that's a lot of how it works.
No. People who earn a daily wage and that's all they get with a W-2 do not have the ability to invest. They don't have. They don't. It's not as dynamic. That's the whole point behind the Laffer curve. Rich people have more tools in their I guess toolbox to put this money that they save to
Trickle
work.
down. You're talking about trickle down. I think that what the evidence of trickle down shows is he's not just going to go out and spend every single dollar he gets back from the government. He's going to invest it. He's going to save it. He's going to do smart, rich person things.
I certainly would.
And that's great if you own a lot of Google stock or you're JP Morgan Chase. It's not, if you want people to go out and spend their tax refunds, you should give it to the bottom quartile. They're the ones who spend it. Every study says
Well,
that.
they did that. So during the big spending binge after the '08 housing crisis, along with the shovel-ready infrastructure projects, they sent out $800 million in the form of checks to Joe Sixpack and Joe Sixpack and his wife. $600 to Joe, $1,200 if you're married. If you paid too much in taxes, you didn't get it. $800 billion of mailbox money was sent to the average American, with an assumption that each dollar would end up being $2.3 as it trickled down through the economy. Guess what? It didn't.
Look, you can't prove a negative, but it's widely assumed by economists that the economic recession, we avoided a depression because of very aggressive monetary policy, like from the Federal Reserve and the stimulus, and they're making the cutoff sign, so we got to go. But I could probably argue with you all day about this. But anyway, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure was ours. Thomas Landstreet. All right.
Now, let's move on to our Ben Franklin Circle segment. This is a nationwide initiative led by the 92nd Street Y, the Hoover Institution, and the Citizen University. It's based on Ben Franklin's own club, where he and his peers discuss what it means to be a good person. Today, we're focusing on the virtue of silence, and when should you speak versus when you should be silent. On silence, Ben Franklin said, "Speak not what may benefit others or yourself. Avoid trifling conversation."
Isn't that nice? Avoid trifling conversation. It's something I wish I could say every day.
That's in person and social media.
That's true. It's so relevant for our times, John. And on that, we are very happy to welcome our next two guests, Nehemiah Rolle, the National Director of the Roosevelt Network, and former Representative Nan Hayworth from the Independent Women's Forum Board of Directors. Our greatest welcome to you both.
Thank you.
So this begs the question, when is it appropriate to speak up and when is it appropriate to be silent? Because with social media, even though you're silent, you can actually make waves. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, John, I think social media are obviously a very powerful amplifier for speech. If we consider speech, as I think I'm certainly inclined to do as an American and as someone who cherishes the First Amendment, speech encompasses all the ways in which we express ourselves, whether that be vocally, audibly, or through what we can view. And I think it's important. I think what Franklin means, and by the way, I think these clubs are a marvelous, marvelous idea. And this is the first I've heard of them, actually. But I think what Franklin means is that we should all speak with others in mind. Yep. Be aware that if we say something, it should have value. You know, we should not fear to speak, but we should keep in mind the other in the conversation.
But how do you speak while really being true to this virtue? You know, and I want you to think about an answer in the context of the current NFL protests, which is really sending a wave throughout our entire nation, even in the White House.
Yeah.
Yes.
Indeed.
Our great national conversation now.
I think so. To the importance of both speaking and silence, should be a stand-in for reflection, not inaction, in many ways. So when you're silent but doing absolutely nothing, that is actually not beneficial to particularly anyone. So I think if you are going to be silent, be reflective, but actually speak up when there's actual injustice. That is the importance of speaking up. To the context, or I guess the question of whether or not you should consider the other person, you can, but let's also think about, and this sort of aligns with the protests, who has had the historic role to cater one's message to a particular crowd?
Right.
If you're part of a particular marginalized community, is it your historic role has always been to make sure that your message is palatable and then therefore maybe not represent the truth of what you're going through? And that's the important role of protests in many ways, is to elevate those concerns, to elevate that need and that urgency.
Right. Do you feel that, obviously this discussion of the virtue of silence, we can't avoid talking about the NFL because it is such a salient issue there. Is that the right forum for this? Because there are a lot of legitimate grievances there.
Yeah.
And that are certainly worth discussing. Is the NFL the right forum for that discussion?
Yes, for two reasons. One is the part of the transformative power of protest that it has the ability to disrupt things as normal. And in many ways, I think those NFL protests did that. It disrupted something that was sort of everyone's favorite pastime, that was sort of the hallmark of a Sunday evening with your family, to really elevate an important message, which is calling attention to police brutality. Right. When we focus on the false narrative that it's about disrespecting the flag, we end up obscuring a very powerful conversation around what truly is public safety and whose ability it is and responsibility it is to provide that public safety.
Right.
Well, there is a cost to everything, including protests.
Sure.
And when you look at it, with respect to the NFL protests, they're actually at work. Then you have employment at will issues, right? So that way, if an employer, right, let's take it outside of the NFL.
Sure.
If you protest tomorrow, right, for what you believe in, you have that right. But like my father always told me, that count the cost before all actions, because there's a cost for everything.
So I really like that example, but I actually want to even make it more concrete in why I like to center it around the NFL protest. These are black and brown bodies owned by white owners. So when we're talking about protesting on their own time, actually that's something that Steve Mnuchin said. He said that they should protest on their own time. But when has it ever been their own?
I got to get Representative Hayworth in here.
Well,
I saw that
with
face.
all due respect,
Yeah.
no human being should ever consider him or herself to be owned by another.
Right.
Certainly at this point in our history, we should not. And I don't think these players, they are not owned by their owners, but they are employed. I mean,
They're
by
employed.
team owners rather,
They
but
are,
they
yeah.
are employed.
Sure.
And if I would submit, I agree with you, John. I think simple rule of conduct that one of my friends told me is keep the issue, and don't make yourself the issue.
I have to also bring up something which I thought was
Sure.
very telling, which was in 2016, the Dallas Cowboys wanted to put a little decal
Yes.
on their helmets to honor the police officers who were killed in the shooting in Dallas in last year. And the
Who are
NFL
of
said
different
no.
races,
Right,
but-
of all races.
Yeah.
It's not even about race. And the point is, they were not allowed, and the NFL nixed that. And it was a tiny thing, and that's something which is a broadly, like we can all agree it's a horrible tragedy that happened, and they should be honored. But the NFL said no, which I assume was they didn't want to bring politics into the NFL, which I can say, well, I understand why they're doing that. And so for them to sort of condone, and now you see team owners kneeling down, and it's become such a hurrah virtue signaling thing. I feel like it's either is free speech protected at the NFL or not? Whose speech? I'm losing track of what speech is allowed and what speech is not allowed.
Have thought on that one,
We need a
Nehemiah.
scorecard.
Well, here's the thought. It's not. Respectfully to all, it's not a matter of free speech being allowed or not allowed. Every NFL player, every owner, every fan
Right.
in the United States as American citizens, or even our guests in this country, I suppose, are allowed the freedom of speech. The point is, where is it most appropriate to do that? And NFL players can make a powerful statement about their beliefs, about the relationship between police and communities, and all sorts of other things. But they should do it, I would submit, outside their playing time. Because they're highly influential. They're very wealthy men. They have earned that wealth fair and square. So they should deploy it to better their communities.
So
in
I
whatever
also-
And they
ways
also
see
have
fit.
the microphone. They have social media. They have
So
reach.
Nehemiah.
what is actually quite fascinating is the fact that, and I actually want to point this out, sort of a meta thing that's happening right now is the fact that we're even having this conversation because of the protest. However, if they were to go on to social media, use their sort of platforms safely, is what I should say. Would we even be having this
a
conversation?
lot of trolling on
Because
social
it may-
media, so I
no,
don't know
because
how safe
actually,
it is.
well, no, I don't think so. Do you know why? Because honestly, and let's take this back to the original protest of Colin Kaepernick. He has been doing that work. Some folks have been doing this work before, and yet now we're beginning to have this conversation
NFL.
with such urgency.
The NFL is one of those few institutions that's not political. It's like everyone watches
Till
it,
now.
Democrats, Republicans, and I feel like I'm incredibly sympathetic to Colin Kaepernick's position, and I'm incredibly sympathetic to the grievances that a lot of NFL players have. I just fear that by doing it at the NFL and doing it at the expense of the national anthem, you're going to alienate so many people who would be natural allies to that movement.
See, and but if they were natural allies to that movement, why would this sort of disruption really particularly bother them? And I think when it comes to the
Not
point
the
of
national
social
anthem's
discomfort,
And that's where the
well,
flag comes
actually,
in.
It's interesting.
And those are
because-
third rails in this country,
Well-
and it's very bad PR to target them as your proxy.
So I take it back to my original point, which is who's had the historic role to make their message particularly safe for those? Because one thing that I want to point out is when they say that we don't want to bring politics into this, for some people, every day is about politics. It's about the navigation of one's identity through institutions that never particularly respected them. So within the conversation of should we use our platform safely or should we focus on what is the right form of disruption, I pose the question to the group. What is the right form of disruption?
We have to close. However, I have to state this. I do support any individual's right to protest, whether I agree with how they're protesting or not. I think in Colin Kaepernick's situation, when he wore the socks that depicted cops as pigs, right amid the time of the Dallas shooting and all these other shootings in New York, that's overboard. And I think we can agree on that. And to your point, I think it sparked a national conversation that it was needed, but it's how you protest and what's appropriate. And last but not least, count the cost in everything that you do, say, because it could come back and bite you.
And it
But
could
on that
also
note,
make sure-
And it is.
We got to
thank
end
you
it
both.
there.
Thank you both for
We could
being
talk
here.
for hours.
Indeed, yeah.
Thank you.
We have to have a 2.0 and keep the conversation going. Thanks again for being here. This has been a great Ben Franklin Circle about silence. I don't know how silent it was, but I think it sparked
Right.
the conversation.
Would Ben Franklin kneel
Exactly.
for the national anthem? Only he were here.
I suspect not for the American national anthem. Maybe for the British. You will.
Maybe that's true.
The last thing I would say was that protest is actually patriotism. So-
Well, yes, it is.
Yes.
So
Okay.
is respecting the flag.
Thanks again.
We got to go on. So Ben Franklin circles are easy to start. They can all be as fun as this one, and anyone can run one. And we'd like to challenge you at home to be bold and start your own Ben Franklin circle. Get a group of 10 people and find one of the virtues to discuss. And there's 13 virtues. You can look them up on your phone, and they're great virtues.
But don't stop there. Let us know what you talked about and send us photos on Facebook, on Bowl's Facebook page. We'd love to hear from you. So let us know, on a future episode, what you thought. You can look at, like John just said, you can look at benfranklincircles.org or email bencircles@gmail.com. To sign up, let us know what you think.
All right. As I said, we could talk about this forever, but we got to move on and welcome our next guest via Skype. Shelby Emmett, the director of the Center to Protect Free Speech at the American Executive Legislative Council. It's a mouthful. So let's welcome her on Skype. Hello, Shelby. Do we have Shelby?
Hi, how are you?
Hello.
It's the American Legislative Exchange Council.
The
Nice to
Legislative
meet you.
Exchange Council, ALEC. That's right. Sorry, they loaded it incorrectly. Okay.
No worries.
No problem. Within the past few months, free speech has been a frequent topic of discussion in our country. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've been doing with ALEC?
Sure. So I'm the director for our Center to Protect Free Speech. So what I basically do is I work with our legislators all over the country at the state level to help educate and inform them on free speech matters. So I focus specifically on campus speech, commercial speech, and donor disclosure.
I first want to sort of start out by saying I think it's very sad that free speech, the First Amendment, has become a political wedge issue, in that it's something which we have so few things that unite us anymore, but that really I would have thought would have been one of the things to hold out, but apparently not. And so from a free speech perspective, I'm just curious where you come down on a whole host of issues. And I guess we can start with the NFL, but I definitely don't want that to be the only thing we talk about.
Right.
So NFL, free speech, Kaepernick, all these guys. Is it a free speech issue, or are they private employees and they can be fired at will, as we talked earlier?
Oh, it's both. So if you're talking about the First Amendment, right, the NFL is a private entity. So if the NFL wants to write a rule that says everyone must stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and the national anthem, they can. If they want to allow their players to do what they will during the anthem, that's their prerogative. It's a private entity, and the government has no say to tell them one way or the other. That's the beauty of free association. If we're talking about the spirit of free speech, I think that's different. I think you all make a good point that it shouldn't become politicized. And if you truly believe in free expression, then that means that all of us have to believe in it, especially when we hate it. But in terms of a legal standpoint, the NFL is a private entity and they can make the decision that they want to make, and the market will work itself out through what you're seeing with the consumer base boycotting and using their free expression in their own light.
It's interesting that you say the spirit of free expression, which is something which we don't talk about much because it's a very intangible thing. Obviously, they have a right to fire these players, and obviously, Twitter has a right to ban certain personalities, and private companies can do what they want because they're private companies. But as a culture, and this actually is what offended me so much about what Trump was doing, we got to fire these sons of bitches, remember? It's like we should be fostering a private civic culture that respects free speech and doesn't call for companies to exercise their right to fire people for transgressive opinions. And I think that obviously the NFL could probably make a rule and fire someone like Kaepernick for violating the rule. Maybe it depends on the contract, who knows. But it's such a terrible message to promote, such an anti-free speech message to promote that a private company should act that way. Or maybe I'm wrong. I don't
It
know.
is anti-capitalism.
Right.
Government is actually intervening
Right.
into the private marketplace.
Well, yeah, I mean, Trump is so over the hill on I remember when he was calling up Carrier and threatening them, for 500 jobs, it won't go to Mexico. But so we're so over that hill. What do you think about? I mean, the next sort of big free speech nugget would be these college campuses. I think that's the most salient free speech thing that's happening now on a day to day. Like, what do you think Milo should be allowed to speak and go do his thing, or should he be like? What's your take on all that?
Well, of course, Milo should be able to, if he's invited to a college campus and people want to hear him, he should be able to speak. That's the whole point. You don't have a right to feel good all the time and to only have people say things that you agree with. That kind of defeats, I think anyway, the whole purpose of you going to college. You're spending way too much money in student loan debt to not learn anything new. And most times you learn something new when you're faced with something you've never heard before.
Right.
With that said, I do think you also see it on the flip side, where a lot of people are then upset that people don't necessarily like the speaker that you're inviting. So I'll tell students all the time, if your goal is to actually bring more people into your club, think about maybe who you're inviting. But that doesn't mean that if you do invite the person, the school needs to make sure that you're able to do so. They need to protect you and the right to do so. And they need to hold students accountable that don't believe in the free speech rights, because all public campuses have to uphold the First Amendment and free speech, regardless of what student or student group might decide to have a tantrum over it.
Right. So I got to ask you, though, if I may be devil's advocate for a bit, what would you say to students who say that it's not just free speech, they're actually preaching hateful stuff, they're preaching violence? What would you, and I don't necessarily agree with that, I'm just being the devil's advocate. What would you say to students who are saying that they're threatened physically with violence by some of these speakers?
Well, I would say again that there's actual laws in place. So if someone's actually threatening you, that's against the law, and the campus police would do something about that.
Right.
But there's this big difference between someone saying something that hurts your feelings and some actual show of force or trying to incite violence. And that's in every state law in the country. Every city ordinance has some type of rule or regulation around that. I think the biggest problem here is the administrators on campus that are allowing a small group of people to control everything, and you start to see that double standard. So I think if the administrators start telling young people, these are adults, these are the same people that are able to go to war and are able to drive vehicles, so surely they can handle some words. And what I would encourage them to do is have a little bit of self-respect for your own brain and go out with your friends and hold a counter demonstration and actually argue a point, instead of acting and expecting everyone to treat you like a child, because you're not. You're an adult now. And part of being an adult means most of the time you have to deal with people that you don't like or agree with. I mean, it's society. That's what we have to do.
Gotcha. Well, some people have been saying that it costs more to keep conservatives safe on campus because with the added protest and the violence that we've seen at Berkeley and other places. What are your thoughts on that?
I think liberals should be really upset and offended by that then, because what they're basically saying is that they believe that liberal-minded people are so incapable of thinking rationally in a civil society that the only way that they can respond to ideas that they don't like is through violence. And I think most liberals don't act that way. I think most liberals are reasonable people, and we should be quite appalled and disgusted if they have administrators that think they have to treat them differently based off of their political affiliation. That would be like saying, okay, we have to treat black women like myself differently because of a stereotype about how we act. It's wrong and it would be racist, so it would be wrong to do that for liberals as well, and they should stand up and push back when people in authority tell them that they're not capable of using their brain and critical thinking skills.
Now, Shelby, I got to be devil's advocate again. I'm going to just hit this home again. So what do you do when you have sort of neo-Nazis? And I'm not talking about how, the left says everyone is Hitler. I mean people with armbands. I mean real self-described neo-Nazis like in Charlottesville. And they're protesting and they're saying, yeah, we want genocide. We want ethnic cleansing, which is what Nazis call for. Is that protected? To call for the wholesale destruction of, peoples?
Yes, to sit there and say disgusting, sick things is protected speech. We wouldn't need a First Amendment if everybody was promoting butterflies and rainbows and chocolate candies, right? Believe me, my life would be much easier if the only thing I had to worry about were rational people. But when you're a First Amendment attorney, most of the time you're dealing with the opposite sides of the most ridiculous mindsets that you can imagine. And that's what needs to be protected, so people like me and you who are rational can come up on top and actually have a real conversation. What I would encourage people to do is, again, realize that if you look what happens in Europe, when they basically said in Germany, no more talking about Nazis, no more talking about Hitler, you saw a rise of the underground of hate and of these white nationalist groups. The same thing happened in this country. The more that we try to act like the Klan doesn't exist or Nazis don't exist, the more you see an increase of them building in the underbelly of society. So what's important is to teach people to go out there, but do it respectfully, have a counter protest, have a counter demonstration, come together and show that your view is better and rational. So the best example that I can give was at a school in Mississippi a few years ago. The Klan actually decided to come to the campus. They had the whole get up, the white hoods, the whole thing, looking like clowns. Instead of the students and the administration acting like fools themselves, they decided to get shirts. They printed the school's logo and their creed on the shirts. They all stood around the campus quad and they turned their backs to the Klan and they turned their backs to hate. That was beautiful. The whole community came out and you had like 12 to 15 idiots in hoods and a whole community of people coming together and holding hands. And it showed right away who the rational people were, who the good people were, and the Klan ran off like the idiots that they are. So that's the way that you do it. And I would also say too, don't give people with tiki torches and khaki shorts attention. Go out and show that regardless of your views, me as a minority woman, I'm still going to go shopping, I'm going to smile, I'm going to live my life, and I'm not going to give my emotional energy over to a group of idiots.
All right, we've got to end it there. I mean, people who know me know that I'm a very, very big free speech guy, and I broadly agree with Shelby, who we just saw. But we've got to end it there. It's a discussion that could obviously go on for forever. But now we have our Bookster segment. So we're going to go to our regular Bookster segment. And it's an online community of book lovers. And here we have the co-founder of Bookster, the always wonderful Sarah Hill. Hello, Sarah.
Hi.
And we also have Steve Simpson, author of Defending Free Speech with us. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks for having me.
Okay.
So the conversation continues about free speech.
Yeah, exactly.
Timely subject to come in on.
Definitely.
So, Steve, earlier this week you were on a panel at Harvard called "Is Political Correctness the Death of Free Speech?" Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, the panel it's a series of discussions we've been doing across the country. Dave Rubin, who's the YouTube sensation, I think these days, talk show host, has been doing these. We had Brett Weinstein. I don't know if you guys know who Brett Weinstein is. He's the professor who was at the center of the Evergreen State, controversy. And the whole idea of these talks is to kind of get before students the idea of the importance of free speech. It's to push back against the idea that if we offend somebody with our free speech or somebody disagrees with us, we should all shut up. That's, I think, a real serious issue these days. It's to expose a lot of the ideas underlying these attacks on free speech and to talk about, what it is, why free speech is so important to each of us as individuals and to our society as a free society.
So do you think the root cause of a lot of this turmoil is that people all across America from different backgrounds have different definitions of what free speech really is?
Oh, absolutely. I would put it as most people in this country don't really understand what free speech is. And especially, I think, young people. I think they've been taught that they haven't really been taught what free speech is and why it's important. They haven't been taught the nature of the right, what it actually covers and what it doesn't cover. You have the right to speak. You don't have the right to a microphone. I don't have a right to come on this TV show, and if you don't let me come on the show, that's not a violation of my free speech, right? So, and I don't think a lot of people understand that.
But you can go buy a microphone and say whatever you want.
Absolutely, and you should be able to do that. So if you want to buy a microphone and say whatever you want, you should be able to spend the money and get your message out there.
So what happened? I mean, the locus of all of this stuff is on college campuses, these institutions of higher learning, where you're supposed to be absorbing all these new ideas, and yet they are the bastions of these kind of closed-minded thinking. Why? Why is this happening?
Bad ideas is the simplest way to put it. I mean, students have been taught bad ideas, I think, for generations now. So you hear oftentimes that that the Berkeley free speech movement in the 1960s is the beginning of free speech on campus. I think it's the exact opposite. I think it's the beginning of the end of free speech on campus, because that's when a lot of the ideas were gaining credence, were ascendant, that are now undermining free speech. And basically, I think it comes down to I mean, if you can believe this, there are serious people out there on college campuses today who believe there's no such thing as objective reality. Everything is a social construct, right? And if society is constructed in a way that the powerful are oppressing the powerless, then the powerless have to rise up. And one of the mechanisms for disempowering people or oppressing, I mean, oppressing is a crazy word for this, but this is what they really believe. If speech is seen as a mechanism for oppressing people, and I think this is what a lot of college kids believe these days, then they will naturally fight back against it. If they think that speech is a threat, if they think that just criticizing you is a threat to your welfare and to your, integrity as a person, they're going to fight back against it. It's a natural, I think, response, but it's totally wrong. And so I would put it as students have been taught a series of really bad ideas, and they're not being taught how to support free speech. They're not being taught why free speech is a value.
Right.
Right.
It's just, it's funny. I'm remembering Alan Bloom's old book, Closing of the American Mind.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with it. I feel like he sort of saw this down the road.
Yes.
Even he was 89 that was written, or something really. And I mean, has that come to fruition?
I
closed now?
Well, I think it's happening, definitely. Now, I don't think it's totally happened. So you mentioned the Harvard events, and one of the great things that we're seeing when we go out and we do these events is that there's a growing movement of young people, and I think people across the country, who see that there's something wrong going on, and that they really get that there are attacks on free speech, and they want to preserve the right to free speech. I don't think they quite know how. So, I mean, Bloom's book, where he talked about attacks on Western culture, Western civilization, and the way I would put it is it's an attack on individualism, it's an attack on reason. I mean, it's honest to God, people attack the validity of reason, our ability to actually know the world and understand things.
It's an attack on freedom.
It's an attack on freedom.
It's really very Orwellian.
My point was, if you attack those two things, you necessarily will attack freedom. And free speech has to fall away. Orwellian is exactly the way to put it.
Once you get in, sorry.
Who's the attackers? Like, who is doing it? I've looked at some of the examples, and some of it I'm like, yeah, definitely, like terrorism, sure. But the other ones I'm like, I don't know necessarily if I don't see people not expressing themselves or using their free speech.
I would put it two ways. It's intellectuals, so a lot of college professors, a lot of intellectuals out there, they either are, they're promoting ideas that attack free speech, so anti-individualism, anti-reason, anti-freedom. But it's also, there are some people who are outright attacking free speech. So, I mean, terrorists are one example, and we saw that with the Charlie Hebdo attacks, right? That was a perfect example of that, the Garland, Texas attacks. But then you have the people who are kind of appeasing the attackers, right? So they're doubting free speech. They're doubting the right to offend people. So after the Charlie Hebdo attacks, Gary Trudeau, who's the cartoonist of Doonesbury, came out and he basically blamed Charlie Hebdo for the attacks and said, you shouldn't have, you provoked these attacks. You shouldn't have criticized these people. You shouldn't have made fun of people. So you'd basically deserve it. So we have two things. We have people who are doing the attacking, and then others who are apologizing for that or appeasing that. And if people aren't willing to stand up for free speech, we're going to lose it.
Well, many of the college professors, they're guilty of the same thing you just mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because if students are afraid to really draft what they think and support it with the correct citations, and for fear of the professor, giving them a lower grade or admonishing them in front of the class, that is a form of oppression.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I would call it quite oppression. What I would call it is teaching really bad
It's conditioning.
ideas. And it's conditioning, and in a circumstance in which students are supposed to be taught the opposite ideas. They're supposed to be taught how to think. They're being taught not to think. And when you get that...
I forget where I read it, but there was definitely, it might have been a Times op-ed a couple of months ago, and it was by a professor who said, 30 years ago, students would begin an argument they were making with, I think X because blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And now it's become I feel.
Yes.
And I feel like we have.
Very good point.
I feel like we have.
Yeah.
I think that we have created. See, it's even happened to me. I do it
You're
unconsciously.
younger than I am. You're from the younger generation. See, I try never to say I feel.
It's a terrible habit. And
no, but that's true.
we have.
What if they mean the same thing though? What if it means the
but
exact same
it's a
thing?
subtle difference, and I feel like it has taken on a much more broader than just a narrow definition. It speaks to a whole other way of how we're thinking about problems now.
It's true.
I think that's true, and I that's a really good insight. And the way I would put it is this: when people constantly say "I feel," what they're saying implicitly is, "Well, this is my feeling, right? But it may not be your feeling. It's true for me, but it's not
That's right.
true for you."
My truth.
Well, guess what? There's an actual truth out there, right? There's one truth, and our job is to figure out what
Right.
that truth is. Well, I think there is a real reality out there against which we have to judge our ideas. So the point of free speech and the point of thinking and talking and just having discussions is to pursue the truth, right? It's to figure out what's actually true. And when people say, I feel, it's all about, there really is no truth. It's all a matter of opinion. If it is that, what's the point of talking anymore?
But
If
for
everything,
certain
But it's
they
not,
might
ju-
not know.
it's not just
That's- I
their
think that's
opinion, it's
true.
also they're bringing in their religious beliefs, they're bringing in their own definition of ethics, they're bringing in all these other personal values
sure.
and not actually leaving it up to cognitive reasoning.
yes, I
see it all
think you're
the
right
time.
about that. And we have to separate those things. Sorry.
You see it all the time because in addition to the I feel versus I think, you
Yeah.
also have a lot of as an XYZ person.
Yes.
I feel.
Yeah,
As a
absolutely.
as a black man, as a gay man, as a cisgender, that's a word too now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's all these again, it goes back to as I am a member of this group in the sort of pyramid of oppression. I feel this, and this is what my feelings are entitled
Right.
to as a member of this group, and
Right.
it's all very, as I said earlier, it's Orwellian.
Or they go to somebody who's an influencer and they say, so and so says this, and I agree with them, and you're like, oh, okay.
Right, or they're not thinking for themselves, right? So that's one thing. The point you made is about identity politics. It's the idea that our ideas are essentially determined by our identity. So if I'm a black person, this is what I should think, and I must think. If I'm a white person, this is what I must think. If I'm a gay person, this is what I must think.
Right.
And that is, again, it's the same kind of thing that we were talking about before. It's separating ourselves and essentially putting ourselves in these little bubbles and saying your views can't have any impact on me. I can't be persuaded because of my identity. And once you get that, you get Charlottesville ultimately. You get people clashing in the streets because if you've lost the ability to talk to each other, if you've lost the ability to appeal to people regardless of their skin color, their upbringing, their et cetera, fill in the blank, there's no
We've
conversation.
gotten to the point where if you to what you just mentioned, if you fit this box of characteristics, don't think, just download.
Yes,
All right,
that's
very
really
well
good.
put. Just download. I have a joke, and I say this. It's like one of these joke, not jokes, which is I try to hurt somebody's feelings at least once a day.
Yes.
And I think it's a very, very valuable, and everyone in the control room knows that.
Good.
And I think it's a very valuable skill.
Yeah.
And
I heard mine yesterday
it's words
when
to
you're-
live
We
by.
have the
About the
confession.
dog, yeah.
Good. Yeah, we got because it's you have to sort of constantly press against the cage.
Yes,
and
definitely.
expand. I don't want to say Overton window, but expand the limits of what is acceptable. Because there are powerful forces on college campuses every day that are shrinking the limits of what you can acceptably think.
Yeah.
And where if you're outside these limits, you're a racist, you're a bigot, you're a homophobe, you're a whatever word our alt gender studies professor comes up with, and it's very sad and that's why I view it as a very important mission to offend people.
Well, that's the tools to break down, to shut down conversation.
Right.
We need, so we hear constantly about sensitivity training. Here's what we need. We need insensitivity.
That's
training.
right. That's
Ooh,
right.
I
couldn't
like
agree
that.
with you more.
Awesome.
So what can we do as journalists, business owners? What can we do to help push the envelope open?
I think we need to teach people, I would put it as the ideals on which America was founded and what they ultimately are reason and the respect for reason, the idea that we can actually think, we can figure out the world, individualism, so each of us is an individual who thinks for ourselves, and we have to pursue our own happiness and then ultimately freedom and individual rights. I mean, those are the things that people need to relearn what that means. and they need to understand what the importance and the value of free speech is. It's not just, you often hear it put as, free speech is how we all come to collective decisions. It's how we maintain a free society. They're not wrong, but it's first and foremost an individual value. It's good for you. It's good for you to live your life. You can't live a good life without having the ability to do what we're doing right now, communicate. It's how this great city functions. It's how our wonderful economy.
I think you're preaching to the choir here, but we got to wrap it up.
Yes.
Because they're making the face at me.
Got it.
So thank you both for joining us. Steve Simpson, Sarah Hill, come back anytime because this is obviously a very timely subject. And so now let's welcome Carrie Sheffield via Skype. She is in Texas with the Generation Opportunity Institute. And she was supposed to be at the top of the show, but her schedule changed, so no worries. Hello, Carrie. So where are you? Are you with us, Carrie?
Yes.
All right, let's get into tax reform. So I know this is a fun issue for all of us.
Yes. Morning.
So, I don't know. Opening statement. Good, bad, you like it? Like what? What are we doing here with tax reform? You in favor?
Well, nothing's perfect. However, this will be a huge improvement over what we have right now. So this proposal that's circulating on Capitol Hill, it would make life easier for all of us, including and especially millennials, because it would make it easier to be an entrepreneur. It would make it easier to just basically own the money that you earned rather than having a bureaucrat tell you what to do with it.
Okay, so I'm curious, Carrie. The tax plan calls for the elimination of the estate tax. I'm sure you know that. How will that help millennials?
Sure. Well, it helps definitely with wealth transfer. I mean, what's happening with the baby boomers and our parents, when you're having a transfer of wealth to the next generation, i.e. us, we should be able to have access to, what our parents sacrificed their lives for.
The estate tax doesn't touch most people. It's as the word says, estate, with estates of $5 million or $10 million or more. It doesn't hit most people. It's only for the uber wealthy.
Sure, and those are the people who are creating jobs for people like you and me. So we need to help people create more jobs so that we can have better employment. We can then buy more houses. We can buy more cars. So all these things that we need to do to create more jobs, that's one of the small things of many reforms that are in the bill.
So you think it would be better for the lowest income people to give more money to the rich so the rich can theoretically create jobs for them rather than, let's say, instead of getting rid of the estate tax, take the money you'd save there and give it to the sort of the lowest quintile or lowest quartile? You think it'd be better served giving it to wealthy?
Well, no, you're misinterpreting. Lower income people would not have to pay more taxes. That's the whole point. It's lowering taxes for everybody. And for even those who maybe aren't paying income tax, they're paying payroll tax, they're paying other taxes. So it's going to be seen across the board. And here's something, John, that people don't realize. So our poor and middle class here in America, they would be middle class and rich in Europe. So no matter how you want to contort tax reform and say that it's going to hurt poor people, it actually helps them so much.
Great. The next time I see a homeless person in New York, Carrie, I'm going to say you'd be rich in Madagascar and see how they take it. I'll tell you what they say. I'm very. All right. Yeah. Do you want to go?
Illness. Mental illness is a separate issue from tax reform. Right. Most people who are homeless because
you brought up illness. Okay. You brought up comparisons across countries. I'm sorry, but anyway, yeah.
Well, the tax cuts in the 1980s under Reagan. Yeah. I think it was approximately $2,700 savings per capita under those tax cuts. Right. And even with the Obama stimulus and the $10 trillion in spending, it only actually amounted to $798 per capita. So we definitely need tax cuts. And when you look at the past performance, and I would say we don't have to go, past, the Reagan era to see how that stimulated job growth. I was one of the beneficiaries.
Right.
I was hired as a 19-year-old by Dean Witter with no real, business experience, but due to those tax cuts, stimulating companies to invest in millennials I was a millennial at the time. that created a huge opportunity for me personally, just as an example.
I want to, one of the things that I also find offensive about the tax plan, and I'm a millennial, I'm the millennial here, is it would lower the rates from the current 39.5% to the top to 35%. And I feel like, we had those rates under Clinton, 39.5%, and we had a balanced budget. We had great growth. There's no reason to suddenly give the rich this massive break. And can we put on that Bloomberg headline? No less a figure than Steve Bannon has said he wants a 44% tax rate for the top rate, for those above $5 million. If you're making above $5 million, you can handle 44%. And you know what? That extra money can go to a host of things. We have 2 wars that are not being paid for, that are not being funded. We have giveaways to drug companies. There's so many unfunded things that we could take that extra money toward and put it toward. But we don't do that. And Trump's voters did not vote for this. They did not vote for a tax cut for the 1%.
We don't need the government to be a pickpocketer.
I mean, look, you call it pickpocketing, and I call it roads, and I call it schools. But whatever.
They don't ask you to pay for tax. You just
Minor
take
details. Yeah, well, we need stuff. You like schools, you like roads, you like hospitals. It's like at a certain point.
I also like them to be efficient and no fraud and waste.
The government doesn't always have to be synonymous with fraud. You can find very efficient, good government in other countries. It's just we have it, and it's probably both parties.
John, can I blow your mind? It's possible both to lower taxes and also be fiscally disciplined. It's possible to both.
Absolutely.
Let's be fiscally disciplined, but I don't think the rich need their taxes lowered. I agree with Steve Bannon. Raise them.
We'll end on that note.
All right.
Thanks for dialing in.
Thank you, Carrie. We love you.
Great.
Bye.
All right.
Our next guest is Congressman Adriano Espaillat. I had to actually practice that. Who's representing New York's 13th. I'm practicing. Who serves the New York's 13th Congressional District. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
So as you could tell, we're talking about taxation, and
Yes.
you're in D.C. In the heat of the battle. So what are your thoughts and opinions on Trump's tax plan?
Well, you say that government should not pick your pocket. I think government should not be in a 3-car Monte game. You're a New Yorker. You know what that is, right? A 3-car Monte game is a shell game, right? You got to figure out where the red is, and usually where you pick it, where it is, it's not there. And so, look, this trickle-down economics sort of like model has not worked in the past. In fact, we saw during the Ronald Reagan how it sort of created a huge gap between the have and the have-nots that manifested itself later on afterwards. And so I would like to see a tax reform that helps small businesses that are hemorrhaging all over America, particularly in New York City. You walk to any commercial artery and you'll see businesses shutting down to be replaced by chain stores and the CBSs of the world and Chipotle.
But is that the driver behind what you just mentioned? Is that the politics of D.C. or more so the local politics that are actually doing that?
No, there's no question that regulation also strangles small businesses at the local level. But I think at the federal level, small businesses should get a break. They should get this reform, which I think, if you look at it really, the attempt to repeal Obamacare was to give a shot of steroids to this whole tax reform effort. So having failed at that, at the repeal and replace effort of Obamacare, now this effort to do tax reform takes a whole different new body, right? And that means that they're going to have to now cut services dramatically to be able to extend these huge tax breaks to the very rich. Why not give it to the small merchants? They are the biggest employers in New York. They are the biggest employers across the country. Not the corporations, not the Wall Street types.
Well, I think the tax plan does stimulate small businesses.
How?
Now, not small businesses starting at $1 billion, but individuals in terms of lowering the tax rate. And the thing is, our tax structure is designed in a way to encourage activity, not pay inactivity.
Right. Look, the minimum wage was put in place by Franklin D. Roosevelt right in the middle of the recession. It was done that way, although many people complain about it, to ensure that working class people had $100 more a week maybe in their pockets, and they would go to the local stores and spend it on milk, Pampers, not back then, but now, right? And other things, right? And so this is important, right? How do you bring oxygen to the local economy, right? And this tax plan doesn't do that. Take a restaurant, for example, a startup business. A kitchen and a bathroom may cost $1 million nowadays, right? So that investment that a small business owner does, it could be their life savings. It could be they could maybe borrow from their pension. But let me finish.
Okay.
They can borrow from their pension plan. They're not getting anything back for it. And a restaurant is a very risky business, right? It could go
totally.
In New York.
Totally in New York, right? It
Could
could
be small margins.
yeah, it could be very successful or very, very risky. And so why not give those folks that are opening up these small businesses
Completely
a
agree.
huge tax break? Why not continue also to have access to revenue so you can have roads, bridges, police
So
officers,
it sounds like
teachers?
you're willing to join the conversation to massage this tax plan a little bit, so that way it's appealing to the left, the middle, and the right.
No, I'm saying that the people that are hurting, that are hemorrhaging in America, are small businesses, working class and middle class Americans that will benefit from a tax reform plan that will give real opportunities for small businesses, not the big box stores, not the huge corporations. They're already getting enough help.
So, Congressman, would you support a tax plan that repealed the estate tax?
That's exactly what I mean. The estate tax, right? I mean, if you're subject to the estate tax, you're doing well, buddy. I mean, you're doing really good, and maybe getting you to up a little bit more money. It's not gonna break your back. It's just not gonna break your
So
back.
you're saying that if I'm already paying taxes at a higher rate when I'm alive, you're saying that my estate should give up a big chunk just because I died?
It's not big, my friend. It's not going to break you back. You already died, so you're not going to feel the pain.
Warren Buffett has said the estate tax is good, and to basically allow these enormous piles of private money to change hands with no taxation.
Exactly.
It's basically
Warren Buffett's
feudalism.
not God. There's plenty of other business
Yeah,
people.
what does he know?
Mark Cuban, huh?
What does Warren Buffett know? So I'm curious, Congressman. We all agree that tax reform needs to happen.
Absolutely.
And what we pay for accountants and H&R Block and billions and billions of dollars in cash and hours filing taxes, and nobody likes taxes and the way we do it. What do you want to see in a tax reform?
That's a good. That you just brought up a great point. I speak to local accountants that do quarterlies for businesses. And in addition to saying they're over-regulated, they're getting summons, they're getting, water bills. This is, the New York City real estate tax that,
Right.
all these things are so huge for them that they got to hire an accountant to do all of this, right?
Right.
On top of that. But so I go to them and say, so tell me, what is it that you do? What is it that you see when you do their quarterly that would actually help them? And they have a whole host of things that will help them, including some major capital improvement reimbursement for them, how to lower the tax code along income brackets, right? That will help their customers have more purchasing power. These are the kinds of things that we need to work on. That's a host of things, a list of things that could be included. That we'll have a separate program about that, but that's where we need to go.
If you can allow me to respectfully interrupt and transition to another topic, Puerto Rico.
Yes.
And I think that you have an upcoming visit.
Yes, I'm leaving tomorrow, actually.
What are your thoughts with respect to the White House? Some people believe that President Trump and his administration moved too slowly with respect to Puerto Rico amid all the other disasters taking place elsewhere. What are your thoughts?
It's been over a week, and they've moved too slow. I mean, the situation right now on the ground in Puerto Rico, and I'm heading down there tomorrow, is getting very serious. People are getting nervous. There's looting going on right now. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of containers in the port waiting to be moved out, but they don't have the technical support, infrastructure to get that out of the port. The power, right? Or the gas, right? And so if you send a container with water, non-perishable goods, Pampers, sanitary products, you can't get them to the towns affected because there is no infrastructure there to get them up and out. And so this requires really a military operation, right?
With fair distribution.
A fair distribution. And now a general has been assigned who was previously assigned to Katrina. He has the know-how on how to handle this. But we're going into week 2 now.
Hurting. There's a compounding effect.
That's correct.
I got to ask, Congressman, after Harvey and after Irma, we saw very swift, dramatic federal action. And the president flew to Texas twice, personally helping. The FEMA was complimented. It was praised for their response. And I feel like after Maria and after in Puerto Rico, it's been so slow. It's been so lethargic. We've been consumed with this controversy with the NFL, while people don't have drinking water in Puerto Rico. And I'm just curious, how do you feel, how do we account for these very dramatically different responses?
Well, there's no question that Puerto Ricans feel, as they should feel, that they're being treated as second-hand citizens. They go and fight in our wars. They pay taxes. They do a bunch of things for America. And yet, when they need this critical help, we've been so lethargic and slow to respond. Remember, they also got hit by Irma.
Right.
They got double hit by Irma and by Maria, right? Yeah. And so these guys have been reeling back since Houston and Florida, right? And so, not Houston, but Florida. So, yes, it's been too slow. I think they feel that they've been left out. We got to do the best that we can to make sure that this doesn't become a Caribbean Katrina.
Do you feel it's deliberate?
What was that?
Is it deliberate? Do you think that they're deliberate?
Look, I'm not going to go that far and say it's deliberate or not. I'm saying, we all are responsible for not responding quickly enough. The president spent his weekend talking about whether you should take a knee or not, instead of talking about, I think he did that was done deliberately to sidetrack people and to disrupt the debate, because he knew he had a major defeat coming this week on Obamacare. Right. He knew that he hasn't been addressing DACA. These are issues that he should DACA, Obamacare, healthcare, right? And Puerto Rico. But Puerto Rico first and foremost.
Absolutely.
He should have spent the entire weekend working in that rather than debating these guys that are 6'7". By the way, had he insulted them in any New York City street, and had he not been the president, that would have ended up a different way. You know how that would have ended up, because you're laughing. Look at you.
No, we both know. It's the information coming out of Puerto Rico is so sparse, because there really is, I believe electricity was 100% wiped out by the storm.
Yes.
What's the latest you've heard?
I've been in contact with some of my friends down there, and they're saying what you're hearing from them is that power may not be up for months.
Right.
And there may be one or two or three hospitals that have an emergency generator that is working.
It probably needs gas. It probably needs other elements to keep going, right?
That's correct. Now, they have some unsavory characters that are going into gas stations and taking over them and determining who's going to get gas or not. Wow. So this is getting out of our hands, right?
We need the military.
The military should be there, and I understand there's 5 ships that are already down there. But we need helicopters to airdrop help to small towns in the hills that have been completely disconnected from the main cities for now a week and a half, and we don't know what's going on in there. Whether people have died, whether people that needed insulin, or or have some kind of disease or treatment that they need to get some kind of help on a daily basis or weekly basis. How they're doing.
Right. And my fear is, with Katrina, it took really weeks after the hurricane to realize the extent of the devastation and the neglect and the mismanagement. And especially in the rural areas in Puerto Rico where we have no idea what's going on, it's a very, very...
The rebuilding of Puerto Rico, at the very least, may take $85 billion. The rebuilding of... In fact, Puerto Rico may not have the workforce...
Which is more than double their current national debt.
Correct. And Puerto Rico may not even have the workforce. We may have to send people to help out. There's an expected number of anywhere from 100,000 to 300,000 Puerto Ricans that are going to leave the island. There's 20,000 right now on a waiting list that are waiting to come to the U.S. or other places because they just,
Well, I think a lot of Americans don't realize that Puerto Ricans are American citizens. And, one of the more interesting statistics I heard was from Rick Wilson, the GOP strategist, and he was like, if 100,000 Puerto Ricans move to Florida, that's going to radically change, because Puerto Rico is 8 to 10 Democrat, 8 out of 10 voters there. If that would radically change, the demographics of Florida.
Florida will not be a swing state anymore.
If 100,000 Puerto Ricans move to Florida. And it's not, it's just getting on a plane and going. That's it.
By the way, when they land
to New York.
New York is a good place always to go to.
They got to go to Florida.
It's Harlem. I want them in my district. How about that? So if once they land in New York, they're fully eligible for Medicaid, Medicare, and when they're in the island, they only get a percentage of the benefits that's given to a full-blown American. And so it's ridiculous. Let's give them, the rights and privileges that we all have. Let's help them out as though it was Florida or Houston.
Right.
And let's really up our game, right?
Right. So one more subject before we end off, which is, can you tell us a bit about your efforts to force a House vote on the DREAM Act this week?
Well, that's a very good point, because the president came out and said, I'm going to give you 6 months to work this out, telling us, the legislature, right? The Congress. Well, in fact, there was a bill on the floor, a bipartisan bill called the DREAM Act, that has over 200 sponsors, right, that has all the provisions in it to resolve this matter. So rather than give us 6 months, why don't you come to the table, let's roll up our sleeves, let's take a look at that bill, clause by clause, and let's see what's good, what we can all agree on, and let's move forward. Don't put a gun in our heads and say, you got until, December to do this or whenever, right? But the bill is right there right now, and it's headed by, that's a bill that's led by a Republican Congresswoman from Florida, Ileana Ros-Lehtner, and a Democratic Congresswoman from California.
It's going to be a great Christmas present and well ahead of the State of the Union address.
It will be a great Christmas present for the dreamers.
Right.
But don't come back and tell me that you need 10,000 new ICE agents in exchange of that, because you're going to leave the dreamers in the U.S., but you're going to go out and deport their parents. That's not what we want to see. That's not going to be a fair exchange. If you're saying we're going to leave them here, but we're going to build the wall, or we want to augment our enforcement force by 20,000 new ICE agents. What you're saying, in essence, is that you're going to let them stay here, but you're going to go out and deport their parents.
You can't expect Republicans to sort of give wholesale on the Dreamer issue without some kind of compromise.
And
Where are you willing to go?
And I understand that, right? With regards to enforcement, for example, our point of entries need investment. Not only because of the immigration issue, but drugs go through there, illegal arms go through there, human trafficking go through there. And they're really old and antiquated. They need to become modern ports of entry. Let's invest in that. Let's invest in some technology like infrared stuff that can detect who's coming in and out. I'm willing to take a look at that.
Right.
But the wall is a non-starter.
But also, Mexico has been unfairly painted as, the driver of illegal immigration.
Correct.
I mean, they have their fair share. However, a great portion of illegal immigration can be directly tied to visas. So
I came that way.
Right, so well, I'm glad you're here.
And now where you live, I may represent you. How about that, huh?
I think you do.
What a privilege do you have?
Absolutely. I'm thankful. But it's not just the border; it's also the visa system that has to be revamped.
I agree, but we have to take a look at the visa. America has been built with the entrepreneurship, the innovation,
Absolutely.
the hunger of immigrants. So we don't want to stifle that, right?
Right, not at all.
We don't want to stifle that.
We want accountability.
There's other things that could be discussed. I came here on a visitor's visa when I was a little boy. We overstayed, and now I'm a U.S. Congressman. What a great American story!
Can I ask you a sort of big picture question, Congressman? It is a fact that Donald Trump did better among Hispanic voters than Mitt Romney. He improved on Mitt Romney's performance. I mean, is there any, why, what was the draw there? Why did he improve?
That's a good question. And I think there's a debate out there on what we need to do as the Democratic Party to win the minds and the hearts of folks that stood home.
Right.
Or didn't vote for us. One sector says, one faction of our party says, we got to go after the Rust Belt, that working class, middle class American that was working at a steel mill or at a plant somewhere and lost his or her job and now making minimum wage. They're angry. They're not happy at us. Let's go get them. Okay. Another sector says, let's have our base overperform first because that's home. And if home is not in order, there's no way we're going to go out there and conquer the hearts of anybody.
Right.
I subscribe to that sector of the party. We need to overperform. And to that degree, I think we need to do it among Latinos, African Americans, Asian, women, people that stood home because they were angry at Hillary because they thought Bernie was a better candidate. Whatever the reason was, right? We need to make sure we get them to go out and vote. And once we've done that, once we've accomplished that, then we could go out to the Rust Belt and other places. We got to talk to moderate Republicans as well.
Right. You know, when Trump announced that he was going to do a deal with DACA, he said that he had been made promises by Democratic leaders. And I think he said, like, I'll get massive border security. It was a tweet. It wasn't explained. I don't know what he was talking about. And I'm curious, do you know what he's talking about?
No.
Were any promises made to him?
I don't understand his tweets either.
Okay.
I wasn't in the room, first of all, nor I will be in the room, because I think, that's like an exercise of The Apprentice, right?
Right.
And I certainly won't sit there and be subject to be fired by him.
Right.
But, but let me say this to you. He says a lot of things. I hope he means what he says, because at night he says one thing and then he wakes up in the morning and he contradicts it. And by 5 o'clock the next day, he's going back to what he said originally the night before. So is he really genuine? Does he mean what he say? Is this part of his chess game? That's the great question, right? And so with regards to DACA and all these issues, I think that he has promised a lot, but yet up until now, he has not really delivered, nor has he put a real plan on the table. We have the plan. It's called the DREAM Act.
So are you prepared to stand next to Trump in the signing ceremony with the DREAM Act?
You get the first pen.
You'll get the first pen? Will you take that? You want that photo up? Are you prepared to do that? If we pass the DREAM Act,
what is this? The Inquisition?
No.
Pointed at me as though you're the Vatican and I'm an infidel.
No, I pointed at everyone. This is a dangerous.
Look at that! You got a pen.
No.
What are you, Johnny Carson? You got that little pen, right? That little pencil. Look, I have decided that I will be part of a responsible opposition, because that's what my constituency wants me to do. They don't have the same values that Donald Trump has laid out on the table. And I will be that guy that will be there throwing elbows and punches. And that, I can live with that. And,
It's a true New Yorker.
It's a true New Yorker, right? Washington, Harlem, East Harlem, Hamilton Heights, right? Seen the play. Washington Heights, Inwood, Marble Hill, the North Forest Bronx, all those neighborhoods, they want me to go to Washington and fight every single day. And I think that's what I'm doing.
All right.
Excellent. Great. Well, thank you, Congressman.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Let's make a good team.
Fun. Yeah. No, please.
We have to have a follow-up conversation.
We'll do that.
Yeah.
It's always great to speak to my constituency.
Even on air.
That's right.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining us this morning. Make sure you join us back here next week, Friday at 10 a.m. and also on Tuesday at 9 a.m. for Bold Business. As always, thank you for watching and joining us on social media and letting us know what your comments are and how you feel about it and what you think. Today's show, share it with your friends, and have a good weekend.